Greetings from First United Methodist Church of Los Alamos, New Mexico. We hope this message will be meaningful and relevant to your life and your relationship with God. We invite you to join us for worship on Sunday mornings. We have now resumed in-person worship with one service at 10 a.m., which is live streamed both on Facebook and on YouTube. We alternate each week between contemporary and traditional music. You may confirm worship times and receive more information by visiting our website, firstinyourheart.org. Now may you be blessed through the reading and hearing of God's holy word.
Our first gospel reading is from the first chapter of Luke, which is Luke's very familiar story of the birth of Christ. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. In those days, a decree went out from Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration and was taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. All went to their own towns to be registered. Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was descended from the house and family of David. He went to be registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged, and who was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for her to deliver her child, and she gave birth to her firstborn son and wrapped him in bands of cloth and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. In that region there were shepherds living in the fields, keeping watch over their flock by night. Then an angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid, for see, I am bringing you good news of great joy for all the people. To you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign for you. You will find a child wrapped in bands of cloth and lying in a manger." And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace among those whom he favors." Our second reading comes from Matthew. And although the wise men are included in our nativity scenes and another familiar story, this actually takes place after Jesus' birth. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler, who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. This is the good news of the birth of Jesus Christ.
Thanks be to God.
One of the times I was on a trek at Philmont Scout Ranch in Cimarron here in New Mexico. We were there during the Perseid meteor shower, which is one of the best meteor showers of the year. Normal output is around 100 meteors an hour. The top's around 250 an hour. And so we walked away from our campsite one night to get away from the glow of the fire out into a dark meadow and to watch this meteor shower, and it was spectacular. These weren't like sort of the quick burns that we normally think of when we think of shooting stars. These were meteors that were coming in across the atmosphere that were lasting 7, 10, or longer seconds. And not just a couple of them, dozens of them shooting through the night sky. Until I saw a full solar eclipse in 2017, it was by far the best astronomical event I had ever witnessed. And for those who thought the partial eclipse that we saw here, the annular eclipse that we saw here in Los Alamos this year was amazing, you have to see a full solar eclipse. It doesn't even compare. And the next full solar eclipse will be the week after Easter. I think it's a Wednesday or Thursday after Easter. You'll be able to see it if you go to Texas or a portion of Texas. And the next time we will actually have a full solar eclipse that will transverse the U.S. will be in the year 2045. So you want to see it now if you want to see a full solar eclipse. But with eclipses being the obvious exception, most of the time we are largely separated from the astronomical events that happen around us, right? We just had the winter solstice. You know, Bandelier put out a post on the things that they have around the Bandelier of things that marked the solstices, right? Most of us don't care anything other than the solstice, other than say, well, at least days are going to get longer now, right? And the night sky is even more distant from us. For most people around the world, they do not ever see the full galaxy sort of splayed out across the sky. This is actually a picture from Philmont. That's not one I took, but they had it online. Few people will see thousands of stars, let alone even hundreds of stars. Some people in the cities can't see any stars at all because of the light pollution. Now, we are sort of accepted from that we can walk out and actually see stars, and we don't have to go very far to get darkness enough to be able to see the full night sky. But that is not true for most people. And to show this reality, several years ago there was a truck commercial. I don't remember which manufacturer, Chevy or Ford. It was definitely not Tesla. But the father gives his daughter a telescope, and then he realizes she can't actually see all that many stars. And so they drive off into the forest so she can see a lot of stars. But of course, then they leave the doors to the truck open so that the cab light is on, and the light that shows the bed of the truck is also on, which sort of defeats the entire purpose of going out into the middle of nowhere to get away from the light. But it did show off the truck nicely, which was their point. But the ultimate point of this is say this is not the way it always was. We don't have to go very far back in the history of humanity to find a time in which, right, the skies were fully open because there wasn't that light to distract it, take it away. And when people paid attention to what was happening in the sky during the day and also during the nights, because it was really important. They couldn't say, hey, Alexa or Siri or Google, what's the weather going to be like tomorrow? Right? They looked to the nighttime sky or the sun, what was happening, in order to determine what was taking place. They were connected to nature and thus to God in ways differently than we are today. The word cosmos literally means beauty. That's why cosmetics comes out of that same root word. The 19th Psalm begins, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of God's hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech, they use no words, no sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world." And so I think that Calvin was right, not John Calvin, Protestant reformer, but Calvin of Calvin and Hobbes, who said if people sat outside and looked at the stars each night, I bet they would live a lot differently. And I think that's probably true. The things that we worry about might become a little less significant. We certainly might become a little more humble in seeing this majesty displayed before us and realizing how small we are in the sense of the cosmos, or just our own galaxy, let alone hundreds of billions of other galaxies. We might learn to focus on different things in our lives. We might learn to pay attention to God's glory spread in front of us, to be connected to nature. And not only to appreciate the beauty and magnificence of creation, but also to see what it can teach us and remind us of not just who we are, but whose we are. And so for the past few Christmas Eves, we've been waking our way through the characters in the Nativity story, if you've been here on those Christmas Eves, and looking at what those characters can teach us about faith. And we started with Joseph, who is silent, never says a thing in any of the stories. And we talked about people who are sort of exist in the background, right? Not the stars, not those who are up front. And yet how important they are, and how even in the background they can change people's lives and even change the world. And then there was Mary and her faithfulness and her willingness to trust God and to take on this enormous leap of faith that comes with carrying Jesus, something that could have actually gotten her killed in first century Palestine, being an unmarried pregnant girl. And a role which will also bring then suffering and pain and the loss of Christ. And I think Mary might be best summarized by the first line of what has become known as the Magnificat, her song, in which she says, "My soul magnifies the Lord." And then last year we looked at the shepherds who respond to the angels appearing to them in the fields, who hear about this good news and leave their fields to go and see. And what I said is I sort of imagined that the angels were traveling all around Jerusalem, giving this good news, this message all over the place. But the shepherds were the only ones who showed up. And I'm sure everybody else had great excuses why they couldn't go. But in not going, they missed out on this miracle. And so how often do we hear that call from God? And we too have great excuses, and I can say, yep, I've said to God, find somebody else. But how often do we hear that call and we don't respond, and so we miss the miracles that God is doing around us? Which then leads us to tonight's message. Now, even though the wise men or the magi are a part of our nativity set, they're actually not part of the nativity story dealing with the actual birth of Jesus. And that's because Matthew and Luke, the only two gospels that give us a nativity story, tell very different stories. In Luke's accounts, the one that's most familiar to us because it's the one that's read every single Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, Mary and Joseph travel to Bethlehem. They live in Nazareth, but they travel to Bethlehem because of this census. And they get there, and there's no room for them in the inn, and so Mary gives birth to Jesus and lays him in a manger. It's also Luke, of course, then it has the angels running all over the place making their pronouncements. But Mary and Joseph live in Nazareth and go to Bethlehem, and then they return back to Nazareth after the birth. But in Matthew, Mary and Joseph don't worry about finding a place to stay because they live in Bethlehem, which is why we are told that the wise men find them in a house. Additionally, this doesn't happen immediately after the birth. It might actually happen up to 2 years after Jesus' birth when we're told that the wise men arrive. Now, in Hispanic culture, the arrival of the wise men is celebrated on Three Kings Day, January 6th, which is a bigger celebration. They don't exchange gifts at Christmas. You do it on January 6th, on this Three Kings Day, because that's when the kings arrive. We also celebrate that as Epiphany, the day in which not only do they arrive, but it's this awakening that the whole world is involved in this good news that Jesus is even for the Jews, non-Jews, the Gentiles who come and worship him. And so that's why this passage from Matthew is not read on Christmas Eve normally, except I chose it specifically for this. It's read on January 6th, or the Sunday closest to January 6th. Now, we do know that people in the ancient world looked for signs in the heaven, not even all that long ago, right? Both good signs and bad signs. What does this portent mean for us? Italian astrophysicist Patricia Caraveo notes that in the ancient world, every royal court would have had an astronomer in it. And very little would have been done, certainly the big things, without the astronomers being brought in, saying, is this a good time for us to do this? Is it a bad time, right? What are the stars telling us about what this will bring? And so having these wise men or astrologers as magi can be interpreted multiplicity of ways. Coming to say they saw these signs in the sky would not have been unusual. Now, the other piece to know is that there's not actually a specific prophecy in the Hebrew Bible that relates about a star presaging the arrival of the Messiah. The best message of this comes from the book of Numbers. It says, a star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. Although the context of that oracle is for the immediacy of what's happening in Israel, not about some time in the future, and it doesn't deal with the Messiah. The prophecy about the Messiah coming from Bethlehem, which is what the scribes quote in that passage, is much clearer in the prophet Micah. And there's a lot more that we could say about these foreign men who are traveling to come and see Jesus. We say that there's 3 of them only because there's 3 gifts. It doesn't say actually how many wise men there actually are. We just sort of guess, well, they were men, so you can imagine them not bringing gifts. Only 3 of them showed up with gifts. But we say that there's 3 because there's only 3 gifts. So I don't want to focus on them. I want to focus instead on people's reaction to the star. What did these wise men actually see? And there's lots of speculation about what has become known as the Star of Bethlehem. Some have argued that it was a convergence of several planets, so it showed brighter in the sky, thus being brighter than normal. Others have speculated that it was a comet, so it lasted over a series of time, except that in the ancient world, a comet was usually a portent of bad things happening. Seems a little less likely. Another suggestion has been that it was actually a supernova, which is an exploding star. And that could be a good metaphor for the coming of Christ, because even after the visual effects of a supernova have disappeared, you can no longer see it. You can still detect it through X-rays and radio waves and other things. That is, it continues to carry on even when it's no longer visible. That sort of is a nice metaphor for thinking about Christ. But I can definitely say it's not the star on the cowboy's helmet as well. But for me, all the arguments about what the star might have been sort of miss the point, or maybe intentionally overlook what Matthew actually tells us. Because we are told that after they leave Herod, they follow the star until it stopped over the place where the child was. That means that the star indicated not just the country, not just the area or the city, but the particular house in which Jesus was in. And I don't know about any of you, but I've never seen a natural phenomenon that actually points to a particular place like that, and I'm guessing that none of you have either. That led medieval theologians to actually speculate it's actually an angel that leads them from Herod's castle to where Jesus is so that they can bow down in worship. So they see this star rising, and they wonder, and they follow. So the star shows them something, and they decide to see what it is. Now, has anyone here been in total darkness? I don't mean like going into the garage and having the garage door close on you, but like total darkness, can't see your hand in front of your face darkness. right? Normally a cave is where most people have experienced that, right? And if you've been in that darkness has a presence to it, actually has a weight on you, right? But how much light does it take to break that darkness? It doesn't take much at all. Just a pinprick of light totally changes what's happening. Actually, the last time we were in a cave, right? And they told everybody, turn off your cell phones, because just the cell phone light would be enough not to give you that experience of total darkness. Just a pinprick of dark light will push back at that darkness. And so as we think about Jesus being the light of the world, it's that light that pushes back on the darkness. That's why the prophet Isaiah is seen as one of his prophecies about the coming of the Messiah. And once read on Christmas Eve very often, he says, the people who have walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. For a child has been born to us, and a son is given to us. That is what the coming of Christ is about. That's what Christmas is about light overcoming the darkness. And so it seems appropriate then that Jesus is heralded not just by angels who are glowing with the glory of God, but also by a star. Because while the light from the moon changes, right, depending on the phase that it's in, the stars are always there, and the darker it is, the brighter they shine. And I'm guessing that some of you might have even had bright enough stars that you could read by them. They represent the light overcoming the darkness. And so that star that the wise men saw was not just a sense of wonder. What is going on, right? Where is this King of the Jews? But they had to do something about it. They actually got up and followed. Because again, they go to Herod's courts, and the scribes and the religious leaders, right? Probably some astronomers in there as well. They all tell Herod exactly, right, where's the Messiah to be born? In Bethlehem. They know all the things, and they had to have seen that star too. But they didn't do anything about it. They didn't say to the wise men, we'll go with you because we want to see this thing. We want to see this child. They stayed doing the same thing they had always done. The wise men traveled a long way. Best guess is they're probably from Babylon, modern-day Iraq, right, traveling to Jerusalem and then to Bethlehem to see this child. They were changed by this experience. The religious leaders in Herod's court were not. The most religious people were the ones who did nothing. The foreigners were not Jews, definitely not Christians yet, right? They're the ones who follow to see what God is doing in the world. So for me, I think that means that you don't have to be a person who other people think are religious in order to worship God or to listen and follow God. But I'm even willing to go a step further and say, you don't have to be a celestial being in order to bring light into the world. The astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson reminds us that the atoms of our body are traceable to the stars that manufactured them in their cores and exploded these enriched ingredients across our galaxy billions of years ago. For this reason, he says, we are biologically connected to every other living thing in the world. We are chemically connected to all molecules on Earth. And we are atomically connected to all atoms in the universe. We are not figuratively, but we are literally stardust. We are literally stardust. That means we don't live in the universe. The universe lives in us just as Christ lives in us. We are all stars. So the question is, what are we going to do about that? Are we going to hide ourselves and hide our light? Are we going to pretend that we're just ordinary and that we can't do anything special or important? Or are we going to believe that, in fact, we're actually extraordinary? We are part of the universe. We are stars. And learn to let our light shine. Let our light shine in order to change the world. Because what are we told about Herod when the wise men arrive? It says he's terrified. Not just him, the court, all of Jerusalem, it says, is terrified. But what do the angels say when they announce the coming of Christ? Fear not. Fear lives and feeds off darkness. Just think of anybody who's trying to promote fear in our culture, right? What are they saying? It's about darkness. Be afraid of this darkness. But hope resides in the light. And love resides in the light. And peace resides in the light. And joy resides in the light. We're not called to sit back and just let God do everything. We are called to be bearers of that light to the world. All of us. Because we are stars. And we are called to let that light shine. To be the good news to all people. That's what the angels proclaim. Good news to all people, to all the world. Just like for the wise men, just like for Herod and his leaders, the star shines forth for us, but we have to decide, what are we going to do? Are we going to follow it and wonder and be overwhelmed with joy and gather and worship and bow down to the King? Are we going to stay where we are and as we are, live in fear, to live only for ourselves, and never seek to offer hope to the world? Because the truth is, if our religion, if our faith is small and self-serving, and it does not call us to connect to something beyond ourselves and others beyond ourselves, then it is not from God. When it doesn't connect us to the cosmos and to one another, and this idea of universal love, that we are all interconnected and all interdependent and all intertwined, if religion doesn't lead us to that, it's not from God. If it doesn't cause us to wonder, if it doesn't cause us to live in a sense of awe, then it's not from God. Jesus is the light of the world, and we are called as followers to reflect that light, to be agents of change, agents of hope, agents of light. And in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, you can't hide your light, right? If you have a candle, you don't put it under a bushel basket because it doesn't do you any good. You let it light shine. You are a city on a hill, is what Jesus says. Let your light shine for the glory of God, is what Jesus says. We are to bring light into the darkness, to offer hope and love and peace and joy to those who don't have it. And I think we could easily name those parts of the world, and even in our own communities, where that is true. And it doesn't take extraordinary people to do this. The Christmas story does not take a place amongst the rich and famous, and the powerful and influential. It's a carpenter and a teenage girl and shepherds and foreigners from another country. God doesn't need extraordinary people to do extraordinary things. God needs ordinary people to say, here I am. Use me. Let me be that light to the world, to allow God's light to shine through us. And so as we think of this star of wonder, it should cause us not just to wonder, but to say, here I am, to get up and follow. And then to wonder where it is that our light needs to shine. Where is that darkness that we are called to push back? Where are we called to make a difference? Where can we be that star in this coming year? Because all of us, my brothers and sisters, are stars. So may our light shine brightly into the world. I pray that it will be so. Amen. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to follow our YouTube channel and Twitter, and like us on Facebook if you haven't already. And remember that every action you take today could change someone's life. So make sure it's a good one and be an agent of love. God bless.